Hi everyone, in this fact sheet I will give my initial thoughts and reactions on jazz funerals, discuss jazz versus traditional norms, and give my personal preference between the two. So for my first initial thoughts and reactions, I found these funerals to be interesting and a little bit familiar. I recently went to a family funeral in Louisiana, and while it wasn't a complete full-on jazz funeral, I did see a lot of influences on from jazz funerals on the funeral that we were at. Um, I find them interesting because I like how the atmosphere makes it feel like a celebration of life rather than focusing on the death of the person. I think it makes it a time to come together and remember the happy moments that we had with our loved ones. At the funeral I attended, the actual funeral itself was pretty traditional and mournful, like it was a silent processional. It was just a very traditional funeral. However, during the repast, it was more lively and upbeat with jazz music, food, and sharing happy memories with each other, which reminded me more of a jazz funeral. For jazz versus traditional norms, I believe the norm of a jazz funeral is to celebrate the person's life and uplift them as they move on. And I think traditional funerals are more mournful and somber, focusing more on the grieving period that's happening. The first reason is the celebratory atmosphere versus the somber atmosphere. At a jazz funeral, it's more of a celebration of life, and a traditional funeral is focused more on reflecting and mourning. The second reason is the musical processional versus the silent processional. During the jazz funeral, the processional is more like a parade. There's lots of music, there's dancing. It has a very parade like feel to it. With music being a huge part of the atmosphere. During a traditional funeral processional, the processional is usually silent, allowing people to reflect and grieve to themselves. Um, and then the third reason was community versus privacy. Jazz funerals tend to involve the community a lot. It's a very big event. There's lots of people coming together to uplift and honor the deceased individual. And traditional funerals are often more private and intimate, often reserved for the family and close friends of the deceased. Um, so next, my personal preference, I believe I prefer the jazz funeral practices because it's more inviting and positive. Death is obviously a sad time, but I think it's nice to focus on the time that we had with our loved ones and how they impacted us all in different ways. People shouldn't be defined by their last moments and how their death was for them. And I think jazz funerals do a good job of honoring and sending the person off surrounded by love and happiness. Um, and then, second, it allows us to come together and grieve with one another. Grief isn't something that's just found at traditional funerals, but jazz funerals give you more of an opportunity to express your grief and find comfort in the people who are also grieving and who also loved and cherished the person who passed on. So to wrap up, I found learning about jazz funerals very interesting due to the uplifting and positive atmosphere jazz funerals have, which is much different than traditional funerals. These different norms make them both unique, and they are both cherished ways to respect and honor loved ones who have passed on. I personally prefer jazz funerals because of the positivity and love that the atmosphere creates, which is an atmosphere I believe loved ones should be sent off with.